Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is hanging something above their door. In Turkey and Greece, it is a blue glass eye. In Morocco and Israel, it is an open hand with an eye in its palm. In India, it is a string of chili peppers and a lemon. In China, it is a mirror angled toward the street. In West Africa, it is a small cloth bundle sewn shut and never opened. In ancient Scandinavia, it was a carved stone with a specific symbol cut into it and no further explanation given. And in Mexico, 600 years ago, it was an obsidian mirror placed facing outward so that the darkness could see what was coming before the light could. Every single one of these objects performs the same function. They protect. Not from physical danger, not from measurable, documentable, scientifically verifiable threat, from something older than science. From the force that every human being in every culture that has ever existed has believed in, even when they had no single name for it. The possibility that something unseen is working against you. And what is extraordinary, what demands an explanation that nobody has fully given, is that these traditions developed in complete isolation from each other. Different continents, different centuries, different religions, different cosmologies that disagree on almost everything about the nature of the universe. And yet every single one of them produced the same category of object. A small, portable, or displayed symbol whose function is to intercept hostile invisible forces before they reach the person it protects. Not a weapon, not a prayer, not a philosophy. A thing, physical, made by human hands, placed deliberately, and trusted with your life, or at least with the life you most feared losing. Today we go through all of them, and at the end, the question that the symbols themselves cannot answer. Why does every human mind produce this? The evil eye, the fear that has no border. Before we look at the objects, we need to understand what they are protecting against. Because almost every protective symbol in this video, regardless of its cultural origin, is responding to the same specific threat. The evil eye. Not a metaphor, not a vague sense of bad luck. A specific, documented, cross-cultural belief that a person's gaze, particularly a gaze of envy, admiration, or desire, can transfer a harmful force to the object of that gaze. That looking too hard at something beautiful can damage it. That being seen with too much intensity is itself a form of attack. The belief is ancient, beyond easy dating. The earliest textual references appear in Sumerian, writing around 3000 BCE. It appears in ancient Egypt, in classical Greece and Rome, where it was called times fascinum times and was taken seriously as a genuine medical and metaphysical threat. It appears in the Quran, Surah al-Falaq, the second to last chapter, explicitly includes protection against the evil of the envier when he envies in what is considered one of the most powerful prayers for divine protection. It appears in the Talmud, where multiple rabbis discuss its reality and mechanisms. It appears in Hindu scripture and in the medical texts of Ayurveda. The anthropologist Clarence Maloney, in one of the most comprehensive academic studies of the belief, documented its presence in virtually every culture in Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, and large portions of sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. 200 distinct cultures, one specific fear, the eye that can harm you by seeing you too well. Why this fear specifically? Evolutionary psychologists have proposed an intriguing explanation. Human beings are among the most intensely social animals on Earth, and we are exquisitely sensitive to the direction of other people's attention. Being watched, particularly being watched with envy or desire, genuinely changes a person's behavior, induces stress hormones, increases self-consciousness, and in extreme cases of social pressure, measurably affects performance and well-being. The evil eye belief may be a mythological encoding of something the body already knows, that being the focus of intense, covetous attention has real physiological consequences. Every culture that noticed this pattern produced a name for it, and then produced an object to deflect it. The Nazar blue glass against the eye. The most immediately recognizable protective symbol in this entire video is almost certainly one you have seen, possibly one you own. A circle of blue glass. Concentric rings blue, white, light blue, black, forming the shape of a stylized eye. In Turkish, it is called Nazar bonku, the evil eye bead. In Greek, it is the matiasma. In Arabic, it is the ayn or nazar. The object itself is called a nazar across all of these traditions. The oldest known glass eye beads produced specifically for protective purposes date to ancient Egypt and Phoenicia over 3,000 years ago. The specific blue glass tradition associated with the Aegean and Mediterranean regions has been produced continuously in the same region, particularly in the town of Gurtis in western Turkey and on the Aegean coast for well over a millennium. The color blue is not arbitrary. In multiple Mediterranean and Middle Eastern traditions, blue, particularly the specific shade called mavi in Turkish, associated with the sky and clear water, was believed to have inherent protective properties. The belief has several proposed origins. The rarity and cost of blue pigments in the ancient world made them associated with the divine and the powerful. The sky is blue, and the sky is where divine protection originates. Clear, deep water is blue, and water is purifying. The eye shape performs a specific logical function. You deflect the evil eye with an eye. You catch the gaze before it can reach you, absorb it into the symbol, neutralize it. The Nazar is essentially a mirror for hostile attention. It sends the harm back to its source by meeting it before it can penetrate to the protected person. This logic catching and reflecting, rather than simply blocking, appears across multiple protective traditions in ways that are probably not coincidental. The Nazar in Islam. The overlap between the Nazar tradition and Islamic theology is genuinely complex and genuinely debated within Islamic scholarship. The Quran affirms the reality of the evil eye directly. Authentic hadith describe the Prophet Muhammad acknowledging its reality and prescribing recitation of specific Quranic verses as protection. The scholarly consensus in mainstream Islam holds that protection against the evil eye is legitimate and encouraged through prayer, Quranic recitation, and trust in divine protection. What is disputed? Whether the physical Nazar bead specifically constitutes legitimate protection or whether it crosses into prohibited territory by attributing independent protective power to an object rather than to God alone. Major Islamic scholars are genuinely divided on this question. Some permit it as a cultural practice with no theological significance, like any decorative object. Others consider its use as a protective amulet, a form of shirk, attributing to created things the protective power that belongs to God alone. The Nazar bead hangs in the homes, vehicles, and business premises of millions of Muslims across Turkey, the Arab world, and the broader Mediterranean region, and the theological debate about whether this is permissible has not been resolved. The fear that produced the Nazar is older than Islam. The faith that followed it into the same region is still working out what to do with its ancestor. The Hamsa, one symbol, two faiths, three names. If the Nazar is the world's most recognizable protective symbol, the Hamsa is the most theologically contested. An open hand, fingers together, with an eye in the center of the palm, called Hamsa from the Arabic word for five, referring to the 5 fingers. In Jewish tradition, it is the hand of Miriam, Moses' sister, the prophetess who led the women of Israel in song after crossing the sea. In Islamic tradition, it is the hand of Fatima, the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, one of the most revered figures in Islamic history. The same object, 2 incompatible theological traditions, both claiming it as their own. And underneath both claims, an origin that predates both religions. Archaeologists have found hand symbols used as protective amulets in the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia, in Carthage. In pre-Islamic Arabia, spanning a period of at least 3,000 to 4,000 years before either Judaism or Islam gave the hand a specific holy name. The hand as a symbol of divine protection, of blessing, of power flowing from a holy source downward through a human channel, appears to be one of the oldest religious symbols in human history. The specific tradition of a hand displayed open, palm outward, specifically for protection against the evil eye, appears to have ancient Phoenician and North African roots. It spread through the Mediterranean and the Middle East through trade routes and population movement long before the Abrahamic traditions were born. Both Judaism and Islam, as they spread through regions where the hand symbol was already deeply embedded in local protective practice, absorbed it and gave it a holy name from their own theological vocabulary. The Hamsa of Miriam and the Hand of Fatima are the same pre-Abrahamic protective talisman, wearing two different names from two faiths that have been rivals for much of their shared history. This is, depending on your perspective, either a beautiful example of shared human symbolism or an uncomfortable reminder that neither tradition invented what it believes to be distinctively its own. The eye in the hand. The eye within the Hamsa, present in many, but not all versions of the symbol, combines two of the oldest protective visual elements in human religious history. The deflecting eye and the protective hand fused into a single object. The combination is so visually complete, so logically self-evident as a response to the specific fear of the evil eye, that it has achieved an almost universal recognizability across cultures that understand neither the Jewish nor the Islamic significance of the symbol. Today, the Hamsa is produced and sold in every major city in the world, worn by people with no religious affiliation whatsoever, appreciated as a decorative object divorced from the specific traditions that named it holy. Whether this decontextualization represents the death of the symbol's meaning or the most complete possible proof of its universal resonance is a question each tradition is still trying to answer. India, when the body is the symbol. In India, protection does not only come from objects displayed or carried. It comes from substances applied directly to the body. Kajal kol surme, black antimony or carbon-based paste, applied to the eyes. In Ayurvedic medical tradition, it has documented practical benefits, reducing glare in strong sunlight, possessing mild antibacterial properties, protecting the delicate eye tissue. But its protective function across Hindu, Muslim, and South Asian Jewish communities alike extends beyond the physical. A dot of kohl applied to a baby's forehead, or a small asymmetric mark deliberately placed to make the child slightly imperfect. Slightly incomplete is understood to protect against the evil eye specifically by reducing the child's attractiveness. If the evil eye is attracted by beauty, by the intense envy that beauty provokes, then deliberately marking a beautiful child with a small imperfection redirects that dangerous attention. The protective logic is preemptive asymmetry. Make the beautiful thing just slightly imperfect before the envious gaze can find it, and the gaze passes over. Rudraksha beads. Seeds of the times, Eleocarpus ganitris times tree, a specific species found in the Himalayan foothills of Nepal and India, worn as beads and strings or as individual pieces. In Hindu tradition, these seeds are described as the tears of the god Shiva wept at the sight of human suffering. Different types of Rudraksha, classified by the number of natural facets, called times mukhis, on each seed are believed to confer different forms of protection and spiritual benefit. A single-faced Rudraksha is among the rarest and most powerful, representing Shiva himself. Five-faced Rudraksha are the most common and believed to promote health and protection for the wearer. The seeds have been used continuously in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions for well over 2,000 years, worn by practitioners from renunciate monks to business executives in contemporary Mumbai. The chili and lemon. Across large parts of India, crossing religious, caste, and regional boundaries, A string of 7 green chilies and a single lemon is hung above doorways of homes and businesses and from the front bumper of vehicles. The tradition does not originate in any single scriptural authority. It is folk practice pre-Vedic in its probable origins, so deeply embedded in daily life that it has survived the arrival and integration of multiple successive religious systems without being absorbed into any of them. The specific logic attributed to it varies by region. The lemon absorbs negative energy. The chili is sharp enough to cut through evil intent. The number 7 carries the protective significance we examined in the Sacred Numbers video. But the underlying mechanism is the same. Specific, deliberately chosen natural objects placed at the threshold to intercept what might otherwise enter. China, when architecture is the amulet. Chinese protective tradition operates at a different scale from every other tradition in this video. Where other cultures protect with objects worn on the body or displayed in windows, Chinese tradition often builds protection into the physical structure of the environment itself. Feng Shui mirrors Ba Gua. The Ba Gua mirror, a small octagonal mirror mounted in the center of an 8-sided frame, each side bearing one of the 8 trigrams from the I Ching, is placed above doorways to deflect negative energy, called Sha Qi, or killing energy, before it can enter a building. The mirror logic is the same as the Nazar. You reflect what comes at you rather than absorbing it. But the Chinese tradition adds a layer of spatial and directional complexity that most other protective traditions do not. The specific positioning of the mirror relative to the cardinal directions, relative to neighboring buildings, relative to the flow of water and road traffic, all of this affects its efficacy. Feng Shui, the larger system within which the Ba Gua mirror functions, is sometimes translated as wind and water, and describes a comprehensive practice of arranging the built environment to harmonize with what the tradition calls the natural flow of qi, the vital energy that moves through all things. The protective mirror is not merely a deflection device. It is a calibration instrument in a system that understands the human being as embedded in an energy environment that can be optimized or damaged by the arrangement of physical space. Men Shen, the door gods, printed or painted images of 2 fearsome military generals placed on either side of the main entrance to a home or business, facing outward. The tradition traces its origin to a legend about the Tang Dynasty Emperor Taizong, who was tormented by nightmares about the ghosts of people he had ordered executed. 2 of his generals offered to stand guard at his bedroom door through the night so he could sleep. The emperor, unwilling to deprive his generals of rest, had their likenesses painted on the doors instead. The generals depicted most commonly are the historical figures Qin Shubao and Yu Qigong, both real military heroes of the early Tang Dynasty, now elevated to divine guardian status. What is remarkable about the Men Shen is that they are recent by the standards of most traditions. In this video, the Tang Dynasty was 7th century CE, and yet the practice they instantiate is ancient. Fierce supernatural guardians placed at thresholds to prevent the entry of malevolent forces. The same function performed by the Egyptian Djed pillar and the Mesopotamian Lamassu, the great bull human guardian figures placed at palace doorways, appears now in the printed paper images, updated and replaced at each. Lunar New Year by families across China and the Chinese diaspora worldwide. Norse Runes and West African Gris-Gris. Norse Runes. The runic alphabet used across Scandinavia and by Germanic peoples from roughly the 2nd to the 15th century CE was not merely a writing system. Each rune was understood to be a symbol charged with specific power that could be activated by carving the symbol into an appropriate material and speaking or thinking the intention behind the carving. The Elder Futhark, the oldest runic alphabet, consisting of 24 characters, contains specific runes with documented protective functions. Algiz, sometimes called the life rune, was carved into shields, weapons, and boundary markers to protect warriors and territory. Tiwaz, associated with the one-handed god Tyr, who sacrificed his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir, was carved into sword blades to ensure victory in battle, and was believed to invoke divine justice in the outcome of conflicts. Aegis Hjalmar, the Helm of Awe, not technically a single rune, but a runic compound symbol, was one of the most powerful protective symbols in Norse tradition. Described in the Eddic poem Fafnismal as the symbol worn between the eyes of the dragon Fafnir that made all who saw him freeze with terror. Viking warriors reportedly carved it into their foreheads in their own blood before battle. The runestones that dot the Scandinavian landscape, some of which still stand, more than 1,000 years after they were raised, frequently combine commemorative inscriptions with protective runic formulas carved to guard the grave, the territory, or the memory of the person commemorated. What is particularly significant about the runic tradition is its explicitly linguistic nature. The rune is both a symbol and a sound, and its power is activated at least partly through speech. The carving alone is not sufficient. The spoken or mental intention completes the activation. This participation of the human voice in the protective act distinguishes the runic tradition from most object-based protection systems and connects it more closely to the Islamic use of Quranic recitation and the Hindu use of mantra as the primary vehicle of protection. West African Gris-Gris. In the religious traditions of West Africa, particularly in the Vodun practices of the Yoruba and Fon peoples, and in the traditions carried through the slave trade into the Americas, where they became Louisiana, voodoo, and candomblé protective objects, are called gris-gris. A gris-gris is a small cloth bag or pouch, typically red or flannel, sewn completely shut. Inside it, a combination of herbs, roots, minerals, animal parts, small written prayers or names, and sometimes earth from a specific, significant location. The specific contents vary by practitioner and by the specific protection being sought. What makes gris-gris distinct from every other protective object in this video is the element of radical opacity. The power of the gris-gris depends in part on its contents remaining unknown to everyone except the practitioner who assembled it. You cannot see what protects you. You must trust the maker. This opacity is not a practical limitation. It is a deliberate theological feature. The gris-gris encodes a specific relationship of trust between the protected person and the spiritual authority of the practitioner who created it. The unseen contents are as important as the fact of their hiddenness. It is the most intimate of all protective objects, entirely personal, assembled for a specific person's specific need, carrying the specific knowledge of a specific practitioner about what that person requires. And it is the only one in this video that actively resists being understood by the person it is protecting. The Aztec smoking mirror. The most philosophically complex protective symbol in this entire video is the one that, from a 21st century perspective, looks least like protection. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, was one of the most powerful deities in the Aztec pantheon, the god of darkness, conflict, sorcery, and transformation. We have met him before in this series in the context of the devil across religions. His primary iconographic element was a mirror of polished obsidian, the volcanic glass found abundantly in Mesoamerica that replaced one of his feet, lost in the primordial battle of creation. This obsidian mirror was not merely a divine attribute. It was a cosmic instrument. Tezcatlipoca used it to see everything that happened everywhere, to reveal the true nature of anyone who looked into it, and to show what would happen in the future. The mirror that sees all and shows all, including things the viewer did not want to see about themselves, was simultaneously the most feared object in Aztec cosmology and the most essential protective tool in Aztec priestly practice. How do you protect against forces you cannot see? You use a mirror that can see them. The jaguar priests who served Tezcatlipoca used obsidian mirrors in divination to see illness before it manifested, enemies before they acted, cosmic disturbances before they affected the human world. The mirror provided knowledge, and knowledge was the primary form of protection in a cosmological system that understood most harm as having invisible, supernatural causes. Contemporary scholars and collectors have noted that obsidian mirrors from Mesoamerican tradition were among the first objects to reach Europe after the conquest, and that the Elizabethan mathematician and occultist John Dee, who claimed to use a black mirror for angelic communication, possessed what is now identified as an Aztec obsidian mirror currently housed in the British Museum. The dark mirror that the Aztec priests used to see what was coming traveled to Europe. There, in a 16th century English magician's collection, it performed the same function for a different practitioner, in a different tradition, in a different century. Some instruments, it appears, are useful enough to survive the collapse of the civilization that made them. A blue glass eye above a Turkish doorway. An open hand with an eye in its palm in a Jerusalem market. Black paste applied to an Indian baby's forehead. A Ba Gua mirror angled toward the street in Shanghai. A sewn-shut cloth pouch in New Orleans whose contents are known only to the woman who made it. A rune carved into the blade of a Viking sword with blood. And an obsidian mirror that once belonged to a god of darkness and ended up in a London collector's cabinet. 7 objects, 7 traditions, every continent except Antarctica, thousands of years apart in their origins, all of them doing one thing: placing something human-made between the person and whatever the person most fears cannot be seen. The rationalist explanation is well established and probably partly correct. These objects give people a sense of control over things they cannot actually control. They reduce anxiety. They provide psychological scaffolding in situations of genuine helplessness. This is not a dismissal. Reduced anxiety measurably improves outcomes. Psychological scaffolding is real. The placebo effect is not weakness. It is the mind exerting genuine influence over the body through the mechanism of belief. But the rationalist explanation explains the function without explaining the universality. Why this specific function? Why protective objects at thresholds? Why eyes in so many of them? Why small and portable rather than large and static? Why across every culture, every century, every theological system, including the ones that explicitly prohibit amulets in their formal doctrine, but cannot stop their own populations from making them? Every religious system in this video contains, somewhere in its theology, a prohibition or at minimum, a serious caution about attributing protective power to created objects. The Quran warns against shirk. The Torah warns against idolatry. The Church warns against superstition. Hindu philosophers distinguish between folk practice and proper Vedantic understanding. And in every one of these traditions, the protective objects persist anyway. Not despite the theological warnings. Alongside them, as if the need they respond to is older and more fundamental than any formal theology, a need the theologies acknowledge even while they struggle to contain it. The Nazar, the Hamsa, the Rudraksha, the Gris-Gris, the Ba Gua mirror, the Algiz rune, the obsidian of Tezcatlipoca. They are not the beliefs of simple people who did not know better. They are the surviving evidence of one of the most persistent convictions in the history of the human mind: that the world contains forces that cannot be seen, that some of those forces do not wish you well, and that a human being with the right object placed in the right position can do something about that.